Now that we've completed our planning budget and compared it to our actual results, we can go ahead and complete our flexible budget. So remember, why is a flexible budget necessary? So with our planning budget, we are using a planned level of activity. And when that planned level of activity is different from the actual level of activity, here we mowed 50 more lawns than we planned for, then these variances that we computed, comparing actual results to planning results, or planning amounts or planned amounts, these variances aren't as useful as they could be, because there is more than one reason for these variances. That's where the flexible budget comes in, where the flexible budget, remember, it tells us what revenues and expenses should have been now given the actual level of activity. So we're getting to really take a deeper look into these differences and see what the reasons might be for those differences. So what I've done here on the next tab is I've copied over my planning budget numbers and my actual results, along with those revenue and cost formulas, over to our flexible budget. So we're going to flex the budget now. So we have our revenue and cost formulas like before, our actual results, and then the planning budget. So with the flexible budget, your planning budget amounts are going to go on the right-hand side, actual results on the left, and you're going to do your flexible budget figures in the middle of those two. So instead of just comparing actual to planning, we're inserting this flexible budget in the middle to better explain that difference between the revenue and expenses that we planned for and that actually happened. So what level of activity do we have to use when completing the flexible budget? Well, the planning budget, remember, that's done before the period starts, so we only have a planned level of activity to rely on. The flexible budget we do at the end of the period, once we know how many lawns we actually mowed. So the flexible budget uses the actual level of activity. So here we're going to use 550 lawns. And we're going to take that 550 lawns along with those revenue and cost formulas to see what should revenue and expenses have been given how many lawns I actually ended up mowing. So for revenue, let's figure out, okay, we actually mowed 550 lawns. We generated $43,000 of revenue in actuality, but what amount of revenue should we have generated? So here's where we take the actual level of activity of 550 lawns and multiply it by 75 for the $75 of revenue per lawn. So when we are actually mowing 550 lawns, based on that revenue formula, we should be bringing in $41,250. In actuality, we brought in $43,000. So before we find any variances, let's complete all of our expenses here first. So what should our wages and salaries cost have been when we actually mow 550 lawns? Well, we take that cost formula, we start with the fixed element of $5,000 and add in the variable element, which is $30, times the activity level, which in this case is 550 lawns. So we can see here that our wages and salaries should have been $21,500 when we actually mow 550 lawns. Now we're going to do the same for gasoline and supplies. The gasoline and supplies cost formula is $9 of gasoline and supplies per lawn. So we're going to take $9 and multiply that by 550 lawns. So we should have spent $4,950. Equipment maintenance, that's also a variable cost. So we're going to take that $3 and multiply it by 550 lawns to see that we should have spent $1,650 on equipment maintenance. Now, all of these remaining costs are just fixed costs. So we use all of those same revenue and cost formulas for the flexible budget like we do for the planning budget. So they're fixed costs. So the office and shop utilities being fixed, it should be $1,000 when we mow 550 lawns, as long as it's within that relevant range. Office and shop rent should be $2,000. Equipment depreciation, we should have spent $2,500 or incurred that expense of $2,500, and we should have spent $1,000 on insurance when we mow that amount of lawns. So let's see what our total expenses should have been at the actual level of activity. So at our actual level of activity, our total expenses should have been $34,600. Now, given that, what should our net operating income have been at the actual level of activity? We're going to take what revenue should have been and then minus what expenses should have been to see that our net operating income should have been $6,650. Now, just as a reminder, the planning budget and the flexible budget, since they're both budgets, they both use the same revenue and cost formulas. What's the difference? The planning budget is completed at the beginning of the period, and so we use the planned level of activity when we plug into those formulas. The flexible budget, on the other hand, is completed at the end of the period once we know what our actual activity actually is. So we're going to plug in 550 into these formulas instead when we complete the flexible budget. So I'm going to pause this video here, and then in the next video we'll continue right on from here and compute our various variances here.